Hey, I just got invited to do a keynote at the World Bank.
Ooh, can I come? Don't you love when somebody just wants to ride your coattails?
Yes.
Super duper. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Josefina Bonilla, and with us is Dr. Lisa Coleman. Dr. Coleman, sorry about that, just trying to get connected.
Oh, it's good to see you, Josefina. Welcome to 2021. Here we are. It's a new
Oof,
beginning
it's
of
already been a rough couple of weeks.
it was a rough beginning. It was definitely a rough beginning to the year nationally, certainly here in the United States, But hey, well, 2021. I saw this meme that was don't bring 2020 into 2021. It was like, see ya from the bottom. So I think the beginning, we were bringing a little bit of that into 2021. Let's hope we can keep it at bay.
Well, I always think that that it's good. You're always going to do that. And then I feel like by February 1st,
Yes.
that you have clear intentions of how your 2021 is going to be.
Well, right. January, a lot of people do these reflection months during
Yes.
January. So that
Yes.
January, I know a lot of people take the time not only to double down on things like mindfulness and meditation, cleansing. We know that a lot of people do cleanses during January. And of course, there are those resolutions, right? And so it's a time of reflection. Um, but then a time to think about the new things that we're going to engage. And so, at the end of this month, we'll have a new administration here in the United States federally, with some new appointments in terms of the cabinets. And then in terms of higher education in the corporate world, we'll also see some new appointments in places like the Department of Labor, the Department of Education, the Surgeon General, all of those things. So when people say, am I optimistic? I'm not exactly optimistic, but I'm definitely, I think things will change, and I'm up for change. So that's what I like. I'm up for change. We'll see where this goes.
I am definitely up for change. I think I have to say, I'm a little hesitant. What was the word I used before we even got started? Apprehensive. No.
Apprehensive. Yeah.
Was it apprehensive? Yeah, I am a little apprehensive. I mean, following what happened at the state capitol and all the things that we've been seeing, the change of democracy, the change of, I mean, I don't really want to go into the whole political, but can you talk about race without going into politics?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So the things that we've been seeing, right, when we think about the murders of people like George Floyd and all of those things that occurred, and a lot of people and you think about somebody like Brian Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy and runs the Clemency Project, runs the Equal Justice Initiative, excuse me, right? And so one of the things that Brian Stevenson has been quoted as saying is, I hope that the future doesn't look like the past, right? So if we think about rates of incarceration and we think about, right, every people who were surprised or were thought that the murder of people like George Floyd, these recent murders, well, we can go back in time, right? We can go back to Trayvon Martin. We can go back to so many individuals, back to Emmett Till. I mean, this is the history across time of the degradation of particularly Black men, women, and children, right? Men, women, and children. And so, and then of course, the degradation of people of Latinx descent, the exclusion acts, all these kinds of things that we've
Yes.
done.
Yes.
So to put a noose at the Capitol, right, during that
Transition.
right. So let's not talk about politics. Let's just talk about that news. Let's just talk about the symbol of that, right, at the beginning of a new administration and what it took for people to be able to do that. And for the supposed authorities who were supposed to be helping to diffuse that situation to let that news stand there and to take selfies with some of these individuals. And so, right, so when we're thinking about race, right, and the way in which race is conferred and discrimination and the ways in which those things happen, not in reality, but then also symbolically, right? Those things pave the way for things like these kinds of murders that have taken place over time and the discrimination. And so what I'm hoping, right, I'm apprehensive, but I'm hoping that people saw that, right? That people saw like, who gets to go take over the Capitol and walk away,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who
Mm-hmm.
gets to do that? And now we're searching for those people, but they were there, right? And I think if a different group of people had descended upon the Capitol, ooh, they may not have been able to leave in the same ways. I'm not sure they
Exactly.
would have been able to erect a noose. They wouldn't have been able to get into Nancy Pelosi's office and put their feet on the desk. All of those things are about, to some degree, right, how people are read through racial lenses, and then the things that the ways in which we get treated and don't get treated. And so I think that we are all very well aware of the fact that if a group of Black and Brown people had descended on the Capitol in that way at that time, that's not about politics. There
Yes.
would have been a totally different outcome. And
Yes.
um,
Absolutely.
and so
You're
that's
absolutely
the thing
right with that.
about. Right, right. Those are the things I think we can think about and think about what does that mean in terms of thinking about policing, right? Access, right? All of those things
And,
in the
and
wake up. So if we're going to bring anything into 2020, let's bring some reality about what race really means and how we're going to navigate that and deal with that in 2021 and not be surprised.
and not be surprising. I think, how do you take what happened in the Capitol, and because we often talk about corporate, how does that play out in corporate as well?
Absolutely. And so I think for a lot of people, and we've been talking about this in some of these, right, these webinars, is that for a lot of people, they keep thinking that they're going to hire a chief diversity officer or bring a consultant in, and that's going to solve the race problems in your company. The race problems in your company and exist in your company, but they exist outside of your company. So you have to develop strategies that allow, right? And I've said this before, right? That allow leaders, that allow managers. People are coming to our workplaces increasingly stressed. If we think about the mental health issues and the rise of those and the intersections of those mental health issues with, right, the stresses that people from certain communities are experiencing. I just saw this, and I wish I could remember the article, but it was just in the New York Times this weekend, and it was something like 140,000 jobs were lost. Don't quote me on the exact
I
number,
did see that New York Times this
right?
morning.
And it was all women. They were all women. So if we think about all of the stresses, right, how are you in the corporate, right, space dealing with those stresses? What about two household incomes, right, for the person who's at the job? And then if you think about the racialized impact, because we know that people who are members of uh, Black and Brown communities, they're often underpaid. So then, if the wife loses the job and the husband is underpaid, how is that going to impact? And how are you thinking about that in the workplace, right? So, these are the stresses that I just think we have to begin to be more nimble in our workplaces, to think about how we're having these conversations, how we're taking into account the stresses, and it can't be just our employee resource programs, right? The EPA programs where we send them to go get
Exactly.
counseling, right?
You're absolutely right, because even as we think about the school systems, for example, the
That's
school systems are a perfect example of how they had to start looking at the whole family.
when we think about that idea of wraparound, right, that comes out of the K through 12 sort of idea of that wraparound system, it's not just about when you're in class, right? It's when you're outside of class. And that includes aftercare, that includes where are you getting your dinner? It's about nutrition, because if you're not eating, you can't pay attention in class, right?
You're not sleeping if
If you're not
you're
sleeping, if you don't have the supports around you, all of those things. So if you think about your employee, right, your employee who doesn't sleep, right, because now they've had to take two jobs on because their wife lost their job, right? All of these kinds of things. So, I was pleased to hear when some companies had started to do some of these things to partner with other companies.
Mhm.
Large airlines have started to partner with companies like UPS and Amazon, right, to furlough some of their workers. But I do think that we have to think about the different and differential impacts on people of color, women, people with disabilities. And again, how are you discussing that? How are you training your managers? When you're bringing trainers in, how are you thinking about that training so that the managers are able to both, right, recognize, but then also facilitate, right, conversations and follow up with their employees that actually, if we're going to talk about the benefits at work and where it's a great place to work, we actually have to engage the whole person at work. And so how are you training your managers to do so?
And it's not a conversation about how passionate you are about diversity and inclusion.
No, no. In fact, I'll just say this. My call before this one was I was talking with someone who works for a very well-known organization. Let me put it that way. And this organization is known globally. And in this organization, they had two people who were Latinx, Latinx meaning that they are of Latin descent and American, so not outside the country. And
Okay.
they had two African people from America, so African Americans.
Okay.
So four total in the entire top level of the organization, okay,
Mhm.
across the organization. They were not at the senior level. They were right before the senior level. All of them had been there for 16 to 22 years. So they had the seniority because this organization cares about seniority as well. None of them got promoted
Oh,
in this last round of promotions. So at the very time that everybody's talking about Black Lives Matter, uh,
yeah.
right, we have to think about, right, the things that are happening to women, the differential impact on communities, Mexican, Puerto Rican, etc. Right? What are you doing in your companies
Exactly.
promote
Exactly.
and support these individuals and then right the ERGs that help to right talk about the business case and the importance of these groups within your organization, and how are you thinking about sustainability? So yes, it's way more than passion, Josefina.
Yeah, and I've had recent conversations with companies that are trying to bring in a diversity type of programming, and they're very passionate.
Yes, but passion, and this is what I say all the time. When people are passionate about IT, when they're passionate about marketing, when they're passionate about finance, they do something. They create a whole IT system. They create a marketing and branding initiative and assign people to it from across the organization and align fiscal lines and say, this is how we're going to do for this. And X will be paid for from this. And these are the partners that we're going to have. And this is how we're going to think about the internal and external communication strategies and relationship building and capacity building. And somehow when we get to diversity, equity, inclusion, all of that goes out the window and it's passion. And it's like, well, Lisa, do you think we could give to I don't know, to the
Yes.
United Way and to the United Negro College Fund and to the Hispanic whatever? And you're like,
What?
what?
Yep. Yep. Exactly. And I think that all this that's going on outside the companies, right? They're just not looking at it in terms of really doing the work.
It is a business strategy, just like any other strategy. And if you do not approach it as a business strategy with efficacy, assets, weaknesses, right? Do a SWOT, all of the things, all the business language that one would utilize in every other area has to be applied in the diversity, equity, and inclusion area. And now more so than ever. And these passion projects, I think having passion is fine. Just like I said, you can have passion for marketing, passion for IT, but unless you attach that passion to strategic applications and implementation procedures and methodologies, then all you've got is an idea.
Well,
And
I
sometimes
liken
not a
it.
very good one because it hasn't even been tried.
Exactly. I liken it to say honestly, and I'm not joking. It's kind of like my interest in crystals, my new interest in crystals. I'm passionate about it. I have a couple of books.
Right.
I've invested a few dollars.
Right. And the
It's
other thing I want to say is, and don't hire the person who's the passion person. As if, right?
no.
So let me just say this. Would you hire a cardiologist because they are passionate about hearts and reading about cardiology? Would
Of
you hire an
course.
IT person who's passionate about IT, who's like, I've read a lot of IT books? And the same here. Like, there's expertise, there's strategy, there are numerous individuals, right? And you can also ask me, ask people for referrals, because this is a well networked community as well. And so there are ways to actually get the right fit for the right company to do the right kind of work. But far too often, companies, organizations are looking for a quick fix.
Mm-hmm,
Quick fix
mm-hmm.
in this arena. And that's what I said. Like, what was happening in 2020 is not going away in 2021. We just saw a lot of evidence of that. And
Exactly.
so, how are you going to manage this moving forward? I say this to a lot of companies. Change in demography is real. Global connections are real. These things have already happened. And so it's not about navigating the future, it's about navigating the now.
Lisa, I wanted to propose something, and I know I'm doing it on the air,
Okay.
so to speak, but I'm thinking that it would be great for us to take a few of the sessions that we have together and break down a strategy.
Let's do it.
Like starting next week, what are the key elements of a strategy? That
Let's
way,
do
the
it.
folks that are watching us that don't have the experience
Let's
and
do it.
maybe need the experience, need the support. And I'm talking about, we know that the Fortune 1000 companies are well populated with diversity and inclusion folks, right? Would you
Yeah,
agree? But the
absolutely.
middle companies, the mid-range companies, they're not,
They're
and they're
not.
struggling.
They're struggling and they don't often know where to begin.
So I propose that for the next 5 sessions,
Perfect. I
we
love it.
start with a strategy from the ground up. How do you develop a strategy?
We will start right away, and we will start right away with the analytics, how you do the analytics to even get to the strategy.
I love that. So I think that we have a few minutes left on this session that we can continue the dialogue that we're.
No,
um,
absolutely. But next week, that's where that's how we'll kick it off. How
Yeah,
about
and
that?
that's how we'll promote it. That way, when you're thinking about these companies that are watching, which we get a lot of, new people that are being put in positions of diversity and inclusion that may or may not have the experience. They may have the experience within the company, they may have some experience, but they don't have experience developing a plan.
No, absolutely. We will absolutely go through that. And then I'll also we can talk about what different plans look like for different types of organizations, because to your point, the Fortune 1000, if you think about a global organization, that might be different from the kind of plan you might want to a plan if you are a smaller business that's thinking about your local, right, relationships. So we'll absolutely do it.
Yeah, I love this idea. I'm glad you agreed to it, although I did put you on the spot, which
Well,
I
I'm going to agree almost to anything.
obviously, obvio. When I was in Puerto Rico this last time, which was a few months ago that I had to go, yes, during the COVID, but I was protected and I protected the others around me. I couldn't stop saying that, obvio, obvio. And I just thought back to when, as a teenager, you would say that.
Oh yeah, of course, of course. Oh, you're talking about travel. I do miss travel in a certain kind of way. Um,
Of
but I have to
course.
say, glad to be not out there. So I hope everyone's taking really good care out there. I forgot to say that when we opened up. This has
Well,
been
I have to say that for the first time ever in the life of the COVID, a huge number of my family members have it.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Josefina.
I was going to travel to Boston um, this week and had to put my plans on hold
Oh
because
goodness, I'm sorry to hear that.
they're
Yeah,
crazy. So
no,
yeah.
it's really bad. I just had a friend of mine, her two twins, one died. Uh, really, really sad. And so, and these new strains are super dangerous. So I really hope that everyone continues
Thank
to take
you. Yeah,
care and
that
be
they're taking care of themselves. I did want to talk about something before we
okay.
have no time left. There's this new thing that's going on where states are paying people money to move into their communities.
Oh, yes.
Have you seen that? They're
Yes.
paying $10,000, 20,000. They're giving people living space, and I feel like they are. I don't want to say targeting, but they're hoping that the pool of candidates that they get are more diverse.
That's absolutely right. So what we started to see this because of school systems.
Yes.
So when people were trying to take advantage of certain school systems, we started to see some of this, the moving across school systems. But now what
They're
we're
not getting paid to do it.
no, not getting paid to do it. So now what we're seeing is that's exactly right. People have figured out that if you really want to diversify areas, right, regional areas, etc., you've got to pay people to do that because how are they going to break in? How are they going to move in? How are you going to facilitate that? So that's exactly right. So we are seeing, right, people start to think about what does that mean in terms of, so there's this great book, it's on residential segregation, and it's by Massey and oh god, the other name has gone out of my head. Anyway, but it's a great book. It's been updated over several years, and it talks about to some degree, right, how when we're thinking about race and then residential segregation, where people are literally to some degree allowed to live and then zoned. Right. Because if you think about the history of real estate in the United States, it has to do with zoning, but then it also has to do with real estate companies. And when I or you or anybody goes out to look for a house, we would be steered into certain areas, right?
Exactly.
So I might say, oh, I saw this house over here. And then the real estate agent would say, oh, well, that's a great house, but I want to show you these houses over here, right? And so that's to
I
some
love
degree,
it.
right? And how you're going to love it. And then
You're gonna fit right in.
going to fit right in, exactly. And so we know how neighborhoods and residential areas have been designed. And if you think about even like Boston, you think about where it was rezoned, even the train lines, right, around Roxbury and Dorchester, et cetera. So anyway, we are very well aware of those things. But where people are starting to capitalize, and people feel differently and people have lots of different feelings about this, but with gentrification we started to see, right, some of these neighborhoods get shaken up and what that meant. And so now we're seeing large, right, states and to some degree some private funding being funneled into this to think about then how do you pay people to shake that up.
Right, right. I found it really interesting because the list was, of course, I went in immediately to see what that looked like, what that meant, what type of questions they're asking. And they're hoping that one of the things that they ask is they don't ask you your race. However, they ask you for your LinkedIn profile.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so they can go in and see what you're
See
all
who you
about,
are and see who you are.
right?
Also, right, because now people are also they're looking for, and so when you said target, it's also targeting people who are interested in diversity, right? So if I might not be a person of color, but maybe on my LinkedIn profile, I have a child that's Latino. I'm married to someone. You can find out a lot on people's LinkedIn profiles, right?
Exactly.
their interests, etc. So yes, absolutely. In fact, you can find out a lot more than you can on Facebook, because on LinkedIn you can find out what they do, all those kinds of things, right?
And
Not just
you can really see some of their background.
and their networks,
Their
right? You might not be able to see that. That's not as clear to some degree on IG or Facebook, right?
So I found that interesting. So again, they don't ask you for the race, but it's evident when they go into your profiles that that's what they're going to get. And they ask you, do you agree to come and live here for a year? Right? So your commitment's for a year, and you have to already be employed or self-employed, that you're making money.
Yes.
Because they're not trying to subsidize you.
No, no,
They're
no,
trying
no.
to bring you in, right? And some of the places are Kentucky, Iowa, some other places. I found a Tulsa.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I found it so interesting because I had seen that before as it related to millennials.
Yes. Yes. Of course. And so, so you're talking about two things that are related, because a lot of states, and particularly regional areas, are finding that people are not moving in. People moved out, but they didn't move in. So states like Kentucky, right? Even certain places, so on that, in that, those border states, right? And people moving into or out to the East Coast, or major cities, and moving out of those areas. So people were trying to figure out how to attract people for sustaining those communities, sustaining, right, state revenues and all kinds of things, taxes, etc. And if you think about Iowa, right, a state like that where demography is shifting so dramatically, and you think about Iowa, which is a region that has not attracted a lot of new folks, right? So you have an aging state, right? How do you begin to deal with that, and how do you begin to think about attracting others into your state, right? But you want people, of course, you want people who are employed, you want people who are going to value the educational systems, right? All of those kinds of things. But it does present some interesting ideas around diversity, equity, inclusion. I think where we have to think about is, how does that work in terms of power relations, and then who gets moved out, who gets moved in, those kinds of
Yes, I thought it was very, I think there's more implications that need to be looked at, why they're doing it. The folks that I saw that were selected were all people of color, or the ones that they were focusing on. So I found that really interesting.
Well, I'm really interested in it. And I'm really interested in it because one of the places I work, as you know, is in South Africa. And so I work with a university right now that was a former Afrikaans university, all Afrikaans, and now it's an all Black university. So I'm interested in how those things happen in the transition. And I'm working very closely with the president, Tawana, there. And so I'm very interested in how those things can work and how that transformation can be positive, right? As long as you think about, right, all the implications. But that's why I bring up a state like Iowa, because Iowa or Oregon, those are states that excluded, right, African Americans historically, or people of, and in some cases, people of Latin and Asian descent as well, depending on the areas in those states. And so now for them to be doing this outreach and this targeting, that's different than, right, a kind of gentrification. So
Exactly. It is totally different. It's
to think
totally
about what the implications could be, what the power relations and shakeup could look like. I mean, I think these
and you know, I think about you going into a place like that historically has not been very welcoming, and you know, how do you create community around that?
that's exactly right. How do you create community? So when you said
How do
that,
you protect it,
right?
and
How do you create cohorts? How do you think about things like not just the schools, but community centers, the churches, all of those things that, and when we think about wraparound, right?
yes,
All of those things. So I think this will be an interesting time to watch what emerges. And it will be, we know what I also think is going to be interesting in this post-COVID arena is we're watching a lot of people lose their jobs. And that is very, very sad. But what we also know that means is then people are not going to be able to sustain the lifestyles in these big cities. And so people are going to have to move to places that, right, we've seen, right, the drop of real of prices in California and New York, but they haven't dropped,
Exactly.
you're
Well,
not earning a certain amount of money. And so I
and
think we'll see the reorganization there.
and the way that a lot of people are living, for example, if you had a roommate, both of you were out working. Now both of you, or three of you, or four of you are all of a sudden in the same place having to work.
Trying to do
And there's a strain on the personal relationship, on the technology within your home. So there's a lot of stressors that I think this is it's an interesting time to analyze what's going
Well,
on.
exactly. Would you rather live in New York City and earn X amount of money and live with 8 people, or would you rather live in, I don't know, outside West Virginia or Pennsylvania or something, visit New York City on some kind of stipend you set up, and then actually be able to write your book and live with one other person? I mean, these are the real implications that we have to start to think about. And so, and when we think about the ways that cities are being transformed, not just by the pandemic, but cities are being transformed in lots of ways. So I think there are lots of interesting questions and things as we move forward. I know we're running out of time.
Yes, we are, Lisa. So again, starting next week, we are going to start creating a strategy of diversity, inclusion, and equity strategy for mid-sized companies, and look at all the pieces that come together to make that
Absolutely.
strategy.
It's always good to see you.
Always great to see you, and we will talk soon.
We'll talk soon. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.